This is Norbert Herber from Indiana University and GQ Audio. This final lesson will allow you to see and hear how all the lessons from Chance Thomas's Composing Music for Games function and sound in the context of a Wwise project and simulated gameplay. We're going to start by creating a new music object called a switch container. We'll right-click here in the default group, choose New Child, and then Music Switch Container. And in keeping with the naming conventions we've used throughout this lesson, we are going to call this musical underscore building underscore blocks. Now this switch container is going to act as a container to hold all the things that we've done up to this point. All of these playlists that we've created are going to go into that switch container so that we can create the transitions that will allow us to move from one to the next and do something that's complementary to the gameplay. To do that, I'm going to click the playlist that's on top. It happens to be the Boss Music playlist. Hold down the Shift key, click the final playlist, and then grab that whole bunch and just drag it right there onto musical building blocks. Drop it. Looks like they all disappear, but in fact they've just been condensed inside this. I can click the plus to open that up, and there you can see all of my playlists are here in this hierarchy. In fact, everything that we've created throughout all these lessons is now open and available inside this hierarchy. In musical building blocks, there's some general settings that we can configure in order to make sure that things transition smoothly. I select the switch container over here in general settings. Tempo defaults to 120, but that's not right. This music is at 90 beats per minute, so I'll enter 90 there. And then I'm going to set a grid frequency that goes by the beat, just to give us a little bit more resolution. Now, with those elements configured, we can go on to the next step, which involves creating game syncs. These are labels, more or less, and they allow you to name different music elements in the composition, and those will align with different events that happen when the game is played. First thing I'm going to do is make sure the switch container is selected. Then I'll go over to here to the association editor, and I click on Add Paths, and then click on this little icon, and I'm going to add a state group, a new state group, and I'm going to call it game underscore states. Then, with this selected, I can actually create some states for our game. I can't do it here though. I've got to go back up here to the Project Explorer, go to Game Syncs. I can find, there we go, right here. There, I can find game states right there under states. Select this game states that's up here, is the same one that I created down there. I can add game states by right-clicking this, choosing New Child, and then State. And I'm going to create states for each of the different music objects that we configured in the previous lessons. The first one is intro for the intro playlist that we created. Create a new child state. The next one is explore. Third state is confront. After confront, we had a playlist, and we'll now have a state for fight. The fight was meant to go on to a boss, so I'll create a state for boss. And then lastly, we have that tag. Put that in a playlist called end, so I will also create a state named end. So all of these states are now here as part of this game states container. Move back to the Audio tab, click on Musical Building Blocks, and we can see that this whole section has started to, well, it's populated now, the game states that we created. Move that down so we can create everything, or I'm sorry, so you can see everything that's in here. I'm going to move this down so I can see everything right there. You can see that boss is our first game state, so I will grab the boss playlist and drag that right there. You can see it highlights. It's got a little arrow icon, and now the boss state boss state is associated with the boss music playlist. I can do the same thing with these others. I'll take confront and drop that there. We'll take end, put it in the end state. Explore music playlist goes to the explore state. Fight music playlist goes to fight. Intro goes to intro. And then there's this last state, none. That's the default state. That's there no matter what. And I'm going to go ahead and put the explore playlist right there in the none state. So if something goes wrong, none is a state that would be picked, and the explore music is probably the best one to use for that condition, where if all else fails, that music is going to leave us covered. Now the next step is to finalize the transitions that move from playlist to playlist and are now part of this musical building block switch container. First thing we need to do is select the switch container and then choose the transitions tab. In this area, we'll configure all those transitions and be able to make each one work to suit the particular piece of music that we're transitioning from and the piece of music that we transition to. First thing that we'll want to do is configure this any to any transition. This is the default. This is one that we can use to cover lots of different elements within our game without really defining them. I'm going to set the exit source here to be immediate so that this transition happens as soon as an event is queued. I'm going to deselect the play post exit. And why is that? Well, I'm going to deselect that, and also going to come down here and deselect play pre-entry. You can't see this very well right now. Let me deselect and then come back, and that kind of helps redraw it. So now we can see everything, and there's any to any. So there's no play post-exit, there's no play pre-entry for this transition. Mainly, this isn't relevant to the music segments that I'm going to use in the any to any. Audio Kinetic has a great video tutorial that explains how post-exit and pre-entry work, and in that context it will make a whole lot more sense. So I encourage you to take a look at that tutorial and understand what these ideas are, because they can be used really effectively. They're just not relevant to the tracks that I'm using with these any-to-any transitions. Later on, there is one lesson where we'll specifically address this, and we'll get to see how pre-entry works, and in that case it will make a lot of sense. So back to these transitions. I need to set the fade time, a fade out. I'm going to fade out 2.5 seconds with an offset of 2.5, and fade in will be set almost identically. Time of 2.5, but with an offset of negative 2.5. And I'll talk a little bit later about what those numbers mean exactly, and you'll be able to hear why I've set them that way. For the destination sound, sync to excuse me, must be set to same time as playing segment. And for the layered loops that need to transition, this is a really, really crucial setting because it's what allows that technique to work. Same time as playing segment means that if we're currently in the confront playlist and a cue happens and we want to go on to the fight playlist, that transition will happen and it will sync at the exact same time. Now, if you don't remember why that's important, let's go ahead and take a look. Let's go to the Explore playlist. We look at the music segment, and you can see what that track looks like. Here at about halfway through, there's a transient right here in the right channel of the stereo file that happens at about the 45-second mark. Well, if we look at the next playlist that we would transition to, that's the Confront music. There you can see loop layer 1, about halfway through, 45 seconds or so, there's that same transient. So what that means is that if we were to transition from the Explore music, which is just loop layer 1, and go to the Confront music, which adds loop layer 2, it adds that additional level of intensity, it would happen at this same point. So it means that everything that we've established here would continue. There would be a strong musical continuity. These tracks were composed to preserve that same sort of continuity, and you'd have a seamless transition across those two, which allows you to effectively just layer in this additional track. Now, of course, the same thing happens if we move on and go to the Fight music. We take a look at that music segment. There's that same transient we were talking about, halfway, approximately about 45 seconds, but we layer in there, or any other place, and everything is going to line up. And it will, because here in the switch container, under transitions, the transition that we'll use for this is set to sync at the same time as the playing segment. Now, the other thing that you may be curious about is, why am I using these fade settings? Let me play some examples for you so you can hear how this works. Right now, we're going to transition over a time of 2.5 seconds. When that transition happens, and we can look at this marker as a signal for that, the source will continue to play but fade out over the same duration, 2.5 seconds. When that happens, the destination, Q, will also happen, but it will fade in over about 2.5 seconds. So basically what that means is that we'll have a simultaneous crossfade across those two tracks when the transition is cued. Now let's listen to it. I select the switch container. I go to, let's start with the Explore music. I can click play here in the transport. I'm going to use this little menu option that has all of my game states loaded, and I'm going to cue the Confront music. And you'll hear a crossfade that's about 2.5 seconds long. I can do that same thing and go to the Fight music. And in those examples, we have smooth transitions that take us across those. Well, let's hear this differently. Let's change this. Let's take the offset out entirely, so it fades for 2.5 seconds without any sort of offset. We'll take out the offset here as well. Same fade time, but no offset. Fight music is already loaded, so I'll play that, and let's hear how it sounds with the transitions at the same length, but with no offset. So we're here in the Fight music. I'm gonna take the intensity down and go to Confront. You could hear there's a gap, essentially, between the two transitions. Let me do that again. I'm going to go from Confront to Explore. I'll go back up to Confront again. doesn't sound bad. It just sounds a little weird because one track is almost completely gone and then the next one comes back. You have this weird sort of valley between the two tracks. That's because there's no offset. This offset makes sure that the time over which the fade happens is offset, and so that these two things will happen at exactly the same time. So I fade out for 2.5 seconds with the same duration of offset, fade in at 2.5 seconds, but with a minus 2.5 offset. So those things will happen simultaneously. Now, the settings that I'm showing you right now are in place because that's what Chance and I thought worked best for this music. But your tracks are going to be different, so you may find that different fade times work better given the way that you've composed your music and the way that your tracks need to layer. The next transition we'll create is meant to go from intro state to explore. In order to get that in our project, click Add Transition, and then click these arrows and we'll browse, and again we want to go from intro to the destination explore music playlist. So this is the very beginning. The intro sets things up and then the player immediately starts exploring the game world. The parameters for this are as follows. We're going to exit the source at the next beat. So that means that this transition will happen at the next beat. How does it know where the beat is? Well, when we set up our switch container, general settings said that the tempo was 90 beats per minute, so it can use that to determine when this transition should take place. We don't need to use any sort of post-exit here, and I'm going to set the fade for this to be 2 seconds with an offset of 2. Oops, better type that in correctly. Offset of 2, there we go. Destination settings are a little bit different. We can stay with entry queue, the default. We don't need to use the pre-entry here again, but we do need to set some parameters for the fade in. This fade is going to last 2 seconds, but we're going to use a slightly different shape. I'm going to use this moderately convex shape so that it ramps up volume a little bit more quickly than it would with a linear fade. And then I'll also set the offset to -2. So again, this will be a simultaneous crossfade. The only difference is that this shape is a little different, but that helps this destination come in a little bit sooner. All right, now with those parameters in place, let's audition this. Remember, we're transitioning from intro to explore, so I'll load intro down here in the transport, play, and then we can transition to explore. And you can hear how that came in. This time, I'll let the intro go a little longer before the transition. And with those settings we defined, Wwise allows us to have a really smooth transition from one to the next. And again, it took a lot of testing to get these these settings right. You know, the duration, the shape, all of that was an iterative process, and you'll have to go through that with your own music to get the best sounding results. But, you know, as always, let your ears be your guide, and it will make everything sound really, really good in the end if you give a lot of attention to detail to how those transitions sound. And don't just test them in the same place every time. Test them early on, test them in the middle, test them late. Try to mix it up as much as you can to hear as many different permutations as you're able. Well, we need some more transitions. The next one I have on my list is another kind of semi-generic transition. This new transition, again we click Add Transition to get one, is going to have any as its source, and the destination will be the boss loop, or the boss music playlist. So this means that from any of the states that are in this composition right now, we'll be able to transition to the boss music playlist, and it will happen with the settings that we define. So what about our source? We are going to exit this immediately. I'm sorry, not immediately. We want to exit this at the next beat, because the music that's happening is going to be pretty rhythmic, and we'll want to make sure that that doesn't get disrupted. Again, we don't need the post exit, and we'll stick with some similar settings for our fade. This is going to be a 2-second fade. We're going to have a 2-second offset, and it's fine if this one is a linear fade. No need to tweak that. Our destination is going to sync to the entry cue. And in this case, we do want to keep play pre-entry. If you remember, the boss music, the nested loop that we created in an earlier lesson, has a timpani roll, crescendo, big cymbal, bass drum hit before it kicks into the loop section. That constitutes the pre-entry and is useful in getting these segments to transition neatly together. So let me play this for you. You can hear what it sounds like with these settings, then we'll make some changes and break it, and you can hear what it sounds like when things aren't configured correctly. We're in Explore right now, so we can play that, and then we'll transition to the boss state. And here we go to the boss. And that was a great transition. You know, the Explore music goes away, but under that there's this earthquake of a timpani roll that kind of rumbles out of nowhere and leads us right into that big crescendo at the end. But I said that that's working because we have that play pre-entry checked. If we go to the boss music playlist and look at that, you know, it's this section right here. It's this little crescendo that's happening right there that constitutes the pre-entry. If we deselect that in our transition, it's going to start playing from this green marker. And while we'll play the piece of music that we want, it's not going to sound right because we've lost this smooth transition that was recorded into this file. Let's go back, take a look at transitions. You can see where we are, and I want any to boss. I'll deselect play pre-entry, go back to our Explore music, and we can hear what this sounds like when it's wrong. Now we go to the boss. And again, you know, it's not, I guess I shouldn't say that it's wrong. It just doesn't sound the way that it was intended to. It really needs to have that timpani roll to move us into that big dramatic section, to set up that loop that runs continuously, to help bring, or to introduce the drama of the choir in that section. So in this case, play pre-entry really works well. And I'm going to save this before I make any more changes and mess this up. So if you've been keeping track of all of the playlists and states that we created, you'll know that we have one more that we need in order to complete this, and that's a transition from the boss loop to the tag at the end. So again, we'll click Add Transition, set our source to be the boss playlist, and our destination to be the end playlist, which contains the tag segment. We're going to exit this source at the beat. Again, this is rhythmic, and we want to make sure that we preserve that. We don't need to do anything with post exit, but we're going to set the fade out to be a little bit quicker than the others. This will be a 1 second fade out. We'll give it a 1 second offset, and then I'm going to use that other gradual convex curve. So again, this one is going to drop the volume a little bit more quickly than it would. Oh no, that's not true. It's not going to drop the volume more quickly. It's going to hang on to the volume a little bit more in this area before it actually fades it out. So it will keep things louder than you'd get with a linear curve. It's a subtle difference, but it is a difference. Then in our destination, we are going to make sure that we sync to the entry cue, and we'll deselect play pre-entry. Again, if we go back here and look at the tag that's inside our end music playlist, this has its own sort of natural crescendo, and that works great on its own. We don't need to do any sort of fade there because that's going to gradually fade in and crescendo on its own and give a nice conclusive punch. So now that we've got all of those things in there, let's audition this. We're already in the boss state. I can play that. So there's the boss. I'm going to transition to end. So there was one. Let me go back to boss and try that again. That was a really short one. It worked well. I'll try it again. I'll let it go a little longer. I just didn't let it get to the choir. But trust me, if I had let it go that far, it would have worked out and transitioned really well out of the section where the choir comes in. Feel free to play around with this on your own with the demo files that you can download down in the description and hear how this works, or try these techniques with your own music files and hear how all of that works together. Well, after we put this together and did some initial review within Wwise, Chance thought that the end segment, the tag in particular, just lacked the punch that he really wanted. We can't boost the volume of that because if we do, we're going to push that over the threshold of distortion. We'll end up with those kinds of problems. So a good solution was to just reduce the volume of the boss music. So that is, it's already so intense. You back it down by about 3 dB. It's a little bit softer, but it still has its own musical intensity. And then when you get to the tag at the end and play that end playlist, it's there at full volume and it has a more forceful conclusion to this. So the tweak is really pretty easy. We go to the boss music playlist. We highlight the nested loop music segment, and then here we've got this voice volume setting for the nested loop. I can just change that to -3. That'll lower it by 3 decibels. I'll make it softer, and then to hear how this all sounds in context, let's play from let's say we're at confront, and then I'll go to the boss and then to the end. Oh, but I gotta make sure that I'm not playing the music segment. I want to be within the switch container when I do all of this so that I play the segments that I want to and I have access to the transitions. So again, we'll start from confront, and here we go. We'll transition into the boss. and that really works well. Minus 3B is a small adjustment, but it really helps build the dynamics towards the end. And so, at this point, the entire design is complete, and the way that I've been testing this last segment to make sure that the dynamics were correct, we can test this entire design. The transport is really useful for this. You've seen me talk a little bit about this pin feature. Sometimes things can get pinned accidentally here, and it's a little frustrating, but for right now it's going to be helpful because I'm going to pin this in place so that the Music Building Blocks switch container is locked in there. And then I can set this to any of these switches, or I'm sorry, any of these states that I want to. We can test the none state, and that's what we expect. We put the Explore music there, so that's what we'd want to hear. And it's good to know that that's working correctly. Assuming that somebody's going to start hearing this piece of music when they begin the game, or at least begin this game level, let's start from the intro and then walk through these different states in the way that Chance was thinking when he initially composed them. So the intro establishes our game world. And we start to explore. Explore goes to confront. You can really hear how, while that's a longer fade, probably the longest fade that we have overall, because it's a simultaneous crossfade, the transition is really smooth. It picks up on exactly where it needs to be in that group of layered loops, and everything continues very, very smoothly. Let's move on to fight. So that was one run through. I find that when I do these, I kind of tend to hear the form a certain way in my head and cue this, and it's not very, it's pretty biased. Should do something with a random timer. I cue everyone every, I don't know, 27 seconds or something like that. That one I kind of let everything run through pretty quickly. Let's do one that's a little bit slower. Kind of let this intro hang out for a while. will sit on Explorer for a while also. Let's say we're just going to fight sooner than before. I'm going to back the intensity down a little bit slowly. And then, just when you think everything's okay, well, I think you get the idea. The transitions that we created are flexible and really allow this collection of musical recordings to stretch and be layered in different ways so that the music is really responsive to what happens in the gameplay. So we've seen how the transport inside Wwise can be really useful for listening to the music that we've just created. But there's an alternative. At least here in Wwise, there's an alternative. Now, those of you who saw the Fmod version of these lessons, there's no reason to build a gray box demo in Unity because Wwise has something called Soundcaster. This is a playback engine, and it allows composers to audition everything in an identical fashion, so you can simulate the gameplay without doing any additional coding in a separate game engine. Now, for those of you who do want to connect Wwise with Unity, there are a lot of online tutorials by Audiokinetic and by individuals, and these will definitely serve your needs. But if you mainly just want to focus on music and you want to test or audition your work inside Wwise, Soundcaster is going to be really helpful. So this is how you create a Soundcaster session in Wwise. It's one of the last things that you'll do, probably. Everything has been configured here. We'll go over here in the Project Explorer to the Sessions tab, and then here you can see there's a folder for Soundcaster sessions. We'll right-click on the default work unit, choose New Child, and create a Soundcaster session. I'm going to give this the name MBB Soundcaster Session, since this is the musical building block Soundcaster session. Double-click on it once you've created it, and it opens the Soundcaster window. Then we can take this and switch back to our Audio tab in the Project Explorer. drag our switch container right into the Soundcaster window, and you'll see it gives you the no symbol, places where you can't drop it. It's pretty clear where you can put it. You drop it there, and we can see now musical building blocks is loaded there. And we also have a column or section here for game states. You can see all the states that we created earlier are here. So we can start the game with the intro, go on to explore, confront, etc. And this works very, very much so like the transport in Wwise. The difference, though, is that if your game has multiple switch containers or you have musical elements and you want to audition those alongside sound effects, you can put all of those things here into Soundcaster and hear what everything sounds like together in context. Just to give you an idea, I'll start here with intro, set that up, make sure that's my game state, click play, and it begins. We move on to explore, we can move on to confront, fight, back down to confront, back to explore, here our boss, and bring everything to a conclusion with the end. So Soundcaster is similar to the transport, provides a few additional advantages, but ultimately allows you to hear how everything that you've done would work in the context with simulated gameplay using those menu options. Well, if you did the whole series of Wwise lessons, everything that you created is used in Soundcaster and is connected to one of these game states. You can use this file as an example to help get these techniques working with the music that you write and the music that you've created for your own games. And for details on other Wwise tutorials and resources, see the links listed in the description below this video. Thanks for watching.